All right. Okay. Ako. All right. All right. All right. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Post Lockdown Landscapes Space Sharing in the Emerging Order, a lecture series organized by the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, or PALAC, in partnership with the Research and Extension Program and Environmental Design Studio Laboratory of the University of the Philippines College of Architecture. I am your host, Balbi Santos, a landscape architect and also a PALA member. This lecture series is part of Focal Point. What's Focal Point? It is PALA's online discussion series on landscape architecture and other relevant topics. Learn more about Focal Point by offerings by following us at our official Facebook page, Philippine Association of Landscape Architects. And speaking of Facebook page, we are live streaming right now in Facebook via our official Facebook page. We are also live streaming in YouTube. So if any of you there would rather watch in YouTube, you can just type in post lockdown landscapes in its search bar and you'll find our live video there. Okay, pandemic. The pandemic. You have to be living under a rock if you haven't heard of these current events. After all, this virus has greatly affected our public spaces or the spaces that we share. What used to be spaces where we could move around wherever, however, whenever we want, suddenly it's an obstacle course. Pavement markings, physical barriers, all these things just to impose physical distancing so that we can help mitigate the spread of this virus. This is part of our new normal, or what we choose to call in our title as emerging order. A challenge faced by everyone, but especially for shockingly, especially striking for designers, managers, and frequent users of shared public space. As a platform to share insights from various disciplines on space sharing in this era of the emerging order, Post Lockdown Landscapes aims to help build knowledge on how public spaces can respond to the challenges of these times. We for tonight, tomorrow, and on Thursday, yes, this is a series. For tonight, tomorrow, and on Thursday, we have invited experts of various disciplines to share their insights on this topic. We will be entertaining some of the questions addressed to our speaker after the lecture. Please, please feel free to comment on Facebook and YouTube from where we'll pick the questions for later. You can leave your comments in the comment section of the Facebook Live, or you can leave it in the live stream chat feature of YouTube. All right. Shout out to all of my Sesam friends watching right now. Hello, everyone. All right. Okay, so for the first lecture of this series, we have invited an expert. Yes, an expert from the field of environmental science. He is a university researcher from the School of Environmental Science of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. That's CESAM in UPLB. He's a geographer with research interests in modeling space, scale, and landscape fragmentation. A specialist in geographic information system and remote sensing, he has dealt with land use and land cover change and urbanization models. He is continually improving a single valued landscape index for deforestation behavior of colonist farmers who produce the fishbone pattern of forest fragmentation in the Amazon. Recently, he was director of the Information Technology Center of UPLV. He is currently a member of the Core Technical Committee of the EUP project and is project manager of the UPLB Fiber Optic Expansion and Rehabilitation Project. He plays drums, he plays blues harps, and fronts for a homegrown group of musician friends. We are pleased to have here with us tonight the esteemed Professor Dante Gideon Vergara to present his lecture entitled Pandemic to Pandemonium or Recovery, a COVID-19 Exit Strategy and Post-Lockdown Ecological Landscapes. Please him a warm welcome. Give a warm welcome to Professor Dante Vergara.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to address such a prestigious organization. I am Dante Vergara. I do research and teach at the School for Environmental Science and Management, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And I'm supposed to talk to you about post-lockdown ecological landscapes. First of all, what right do I have to talk about this? I'll start off by telling you what I am not. I am not an epidemiologist. I am not a geneticist. I am not a biologist. I'm not a pathologist. I'm not an economist. And I'm not a lawyer. But I'll be talking about bits and pieces of all these disciplines. Took mathematics as my undergrad, and I am very strong in statistics, computer science, information technology. I hold a master's in geography from Michigan State University, and I'm currently doing a PhD in environmental science by research. I am basically a modeler. I do spatiotemporal modeling. I also do agent-based modeling to model behavior, and I have my own landscape fragmentation index. To do that, I had to model scale itself because I am after how to overcome scale in the landscape studies. Now, to explain to you post-lockdown ecological landscapes, rather than jumping from scenarios, I think it would be more logical if we start from where we're at, the consequences of that, and how to get out of this pandemic. And then I'll give you the ecological landscapes. The lecture outline goes this way. We start with complexity and systems thinking because this is a very complex system. And there is no room for linear thinking and reductionism. I'll present to you a framework for modern civil society and the only possible scenarios that may come out of this pandemic. We'll go through what we've done so far and the consequences of those actions in managing the pandemic. And then I'll discuss the modern immune system and then present my research questions. With that, I'll present a exit strategy. This is not yet a plan. This is just a strategy. And then with that, I can go into the consequences on our different landscapes and their ecologies. Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I drill this into my students. Creativity, criticality, and innovation. According to him, knowledge is limited and imagination encircles the world. Questions. I always tell my students, I will not test you for what you know, because what you know you can get from anywhere. What I test in you is how you think, how you put the knowledge together to form solutions to problems. Lastly, brilliance is coming up with the best answers. So it is how you ask questions that really matter. This requires creativity and criticality to ask the right questions. And the right questions will drive learning. We have to dare to innovate. It is the ways or the manners of the past that got us into all these problems. And if we don't innovate, we will continuously repeat the mistakes of the past. So we go to ecologies and systems theory. In simplest terms, ecology is the interacting of the different components of a system that determines its current state. Each system has a function that it has to fulfill, and the different components will interact with each other. They'll be exchanging matter, energy, information, all those flow within, between, and among these components for its overall functioning. And its overall function will determine its output. The robustness of these components and the flows determine the resiliences to stress, enhancing the sustainability of the system. If you perturb a system, it will seek a new level of equilibrium, cannot recover its former state. So this is an example of a highly stable system. This is still stable, it occurs in nature, but there is a lot of fluctuations. In these fluctuations, if it does not recover, if it is perturbed severely, then it may seek a new level. And this relates to us in that we are in a very disturbed system. Do we recover or do we settle to a new and lower state? Now, to get out of this, we need the data. And there is value in data, even if it was collected for a different purpose. Extracting new information from old data is called data mining. And data science provides ways to deal with data from different sources, different formats, different scales, both spatial and temporal. In the systems approach, data regarding the components and flows from different sources are collected and analyzed to give us a better view of the whole system. We need to look at the system as a whole and not just parts of it. We need to understand the consequences of actions on the whole system. So this is our framework, and depending on who you ask, you can have 4, 5, or 7 pillars of modern societies to build on function. But none of those 4, 5, or 7 pillars included the environment. So this is my framework. To support modern civil society, of course, you need people in a society. You need an economy that's viable. You need a government that will take care of policy, but you need to relate to the environment. It is the ignoring of the environment, this is both man-made and natural, that have brought us problems, say, of congestion, pollution, traffic, solid waste disposal, water pollution, salt water intrusion into our aquifers, and lately this pandemic. They all interact. It's not just society with economy, it's society with economy, government, environment, etc., and all the other three as well. So you have to look at the whole system if you are to manage this pandemic. There are only 3 possible outcomes involving people in this pandemic. The first is the virus wipes out all the people. The virus does not want to do this. If it wipes out all its hosts and it cannot jump a species, it will die itself. Second outcome possible is that we wipe out the virus. This is what the government is trying to do. It wants to wipe out the virus by a series of quarantines in smaller and smaller spatial scales. The third is we adapt and coexist. The Spanish flu of 1918 lasted 2 years and it ended without a vaccine. But there were a lot of deaths and we want to avoid that. So what did we do? We enforced quarantines. In March 14, we declared the first quarantine in the whole island of Luzon and key cities in the south, especially Cebu and Davao. And while we were in quarantine, the government had to give out care packages because no one was allowed out. In April 14, they reduced this to regions. Calabarzon, Metro Manila were the 2 regions that stayed in ECQ. It was not until April 14 when they first started testing. So a whole month went. Luzon-wide, no mass testing was conducted. By April 14, the regions' spatial boundaries for the quarantines were reduced to provinces. Laguna gradually moved to MECQ. The other provinces went to general community quarantine. By June 15, last month, it was down to municipalities and hotspots. So what the government is trying to do is trying to contain the virus in smaller and smaller areas in hope that it can wipe it out. This month, they were supposed to go to granular scale, even smaller than your municipalities. But the recent spate of reinfections have returned GCQ to the provinces. So here in Laguna, we are in GCQ currently. So this is the new normal to arrest the spread of the disease. And if you believe that we're not getting out of this, this will be the permanent normal. You see this a lot called flattening the curve. This represents your curve of infection if you do nothing about managing it. Sweden chose to go herd immunity, so they did not quarantine. They let the virus roam. They incurred a lot of deaths, but by now they have herd immunity. Italy mismanaged the pandemic. They also incurred a lot of deaths, but by now they are also achieving herd immunity. If this line represents your health capacities to avoid a lot of deaths, it was advocated to flatten the curve, which means that you try to control infections. The area under this curve and the area under this curve are the same. You hear about flattening the curve, but what you don't hear about is that if you do flatten the curve, it will take a longer time. This is the time spent. It will take a longer time to manage the pandemic. This is how we fared compared to Thailand in the early part of the pandemic up to April 21st. So how have we fared? July 6, we still had less than 1 million tested. Fatalities are still down. Confirmed cases are up to 44,000. This is the curve for confirmed cases. You're deceased and you're recovered. Clearly from here, we are not flattening the curve. But part of this may be because we are only testing those with symptoms. This graph shows case by age group. In the early part of the quarantines, March and April, you'd see the groups from 51 to 70 as the most susceptible. By July this month, it's showing that the age group from 21 to 30 are the more susceptible. Now, if you're looking just at infections, this will be true. But we have a very young population. Average age is only 29 years old. So this is not surprising since this is the larger part of the population and they're also very mobile. But what I like to point out here is that if this is the admitted, the blue, and the greens are the recovered, and the reds are the fatalities, if you subtracted the fatalities and the recovered from the admitted, you'd see that there are cases who not recovered but not died. So are these the cases who are the mild and asymptomatics? We don't know because the data resolution does not show us that. If we do assume that these are the severe cases, then these are your mild and asymptomatic cases. And they definitely are the majority. Definitely, males seem to be more vulnerable than females. This is July 18, and we've reached 1 million tested, and confirmed cases are up to 63,000. But in a country of more than 100 million, this is not even 1% of the population. And now you see a spike in the recoveries. And this is reflective of the fact that the virus is actually evolving. And again, this is very, very small fatalities here. So, with this, there really should be a line here. And that line should show you the limit of your economic resources. Because we all know giving out care packages is not sustainable. And your economic resources are finite. So how much time do you have until your economic resources run out? So for our economic outlook, as of July 8, they gave the pre-SONA forum, economics and infrastructure. We've already spent about 374 billion, and these were allocated funds, meaning funds were taken out of budgets for others. We have a national budget of 4.1 trillion. So for 370 billion does not look that big. We have an external debt first quarter 2020 of $81 million, which is about 4 billion pesos. And the Japan Credit Rating Agency upgraded our credit rating from BBB plus to A minus. And so are willing to borrow up to 50% our GDP. We normally borrow only 30%. GDP is your capacity to earn as a nation, and you're borrowing up to half your capacity of earning. And our GDP was 376 billion US dollars in 2019. Half of this is about 150, 180. Add to that the $80 billion, we have about 260 in loans if we borrow up to 50%. And then the same agency that gave us the updated credit rating is also forecasting that we're headed for a recession since our budget deficit is widening and we are borrowing massively. The shrinkage in the economy is estimated by the World Bank at 1.9 and Moody's to 4.5. So our GDP will be even less than this. In contrast, Vietnam which has managed the pandemic well, is actually forecasted to grow by 1.6%. So the estimate is that 4.9 million Filipinos have lost their jobs. Unemployment is at an all high of more than 17%. And you have industries that are most affected by the pandemic. You have the arts, entertainment, and recreation, travel, hotel and restaurants, education, technical repair, construction, motor vehicle servicing, financial insurance, sports and fitness, real estate, and professional and scientific services. And for micro, small, and medium enterprises, the estimate is that 40% of 900,000 will not survive. So from economics, we go to the immunity system. This is Dr. Shiva Ayudurai, and he explains the modern immune system. I stumbled on this video January when the pandemic was not even on us yet, and I left here the link to the video because it's too long to present to you right now, and I will summarize to you what he was talking about, and you can follow the link on your own. Basically, the old immune system is just a two-box system, as he calls it, the innate system and the adaptive system. In 0 to 72 hours from infection, the innate system produces a first line of non-specific defense. So whatever pathogen that is, it sends out macrophages, dendritic cells, monocytes to fight against the infection, regardless of whether it's a bacteria or a virus. In 3 days' time, that's when the adaptive system kicks in to produce specific antibodies for the pathogen. So, innate system, adaptive system. The adaptive system produces the antibodies. The innate system is the first line of defense. Here he shows the diagram for the modern immune system. It's composed more than just the innate and the adaptive system. There is in between them the interferon system. Below that, the microbiome. This is what is in your gut, composed of bacteria or viruses, and the neural system. And they all talk to each other. They communicate. And if you do not communicate, if your immune system overreacts, you produce autoimmune diseases. And example of that would be your allergies. Those are overreactions of your immune system. Rheumatoid arthritis is also an autoimmune disease. The biome is part of your immune system. So this is the modern immune system. It is not taught in every medical school as yet. What they're still teaching is the 70-year-old two-box immune system. Your innate system and your interferon systems, they have memory and intelligence. The microbiome, the ratios of your bacteria, determines the various levels of your health, and it is considered as your first brain. So the different subsystems communicate with each other. They have feedback loops so that they don't overreact. When you test the asymptomatics, a study showed recently, do not produce antibodies. And that is the reason because they produce this and it's enough to control the infection. So depending on how strong your immunity is, if you're asymptomatic to this stage, the symptoms don't show yet. If your innate system can handle the infection, you don't go into the production of the antibodies here. So it's the virus is overcome by the innate system, and the adaptive system does not kick in. This is a scale that is not absolute. It's just for illustrative purposes. On the first onset of infection, after this kicks in, your adaptive system starts producing specific antibodies for the virus. This stage where you are infectious, there is an overlap of when you are infectious and when your antibodies are forming. This stage, when you're infectious, is detected by the PCR test, the swab test. This stage, when you are developing or producing your antibodies, this is detected by your rapid test. Tests rapid and PCR have been misused. They should be used for different purposes. One to detect the virus, the other to detect the antibodies. It is at this junction where you could test positive for both. So when you're still testing positive for PCR, you are still infectious. If you tested positive for the rapid test, but negative for the PCR, then you have developed some long-term immunity, but you're not infectious anymore. Now, the small study that's still to be published have shown that after about 2-3 months, the antibodies start to disappear from the body. This is not surprising. It takes energy to maintain the antibodies in the system, and if your body determines that you no longer need it, then it will start to disappear. But that should not be alarming because, again, your interferon and your innate system have memory of the pathogen. And if you get reinfected, then your system knows what antibodies to produce. So my research questions, first of all, do we know the social context of the disease? We've been told that it does not choose between rich and poor, that you could die, whichever your economic status. But who are the more vulnerable sectors and which demographic? We've been told that 29 to 30 because they have the most infection. But we're looking at vulnerability, and I'll explain this a little bit later. Why are the majority of the cases mild or even asymptomatic? We pointed this out earlier. And what makes these persons with mild symptoms or those who are asymptomatic, what makes them resilient while the others are vulnerable? If you can answer these questions, then you have an exit strategy. Now, the difference between what Israel, Singapore, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Taiwan, and South Korea did that we in Indonesia did not do is to come up with the national COVID-19 database. When Taiwan first heard of it, because of its experience with the SARS virus, it sent experts to Wuhan, to ground zero, to collect data on this new virus. And that data they used to come up with their management policies. And one of the first things they did was to come up with a database. Now, why is this important? It's your primary source of truth. Since you lose antibodies as you go on, and if you test after you lost them, then it will seem like you're not resilient. And if these were recorded in a national database, then you know that you have been infected before. But personal data should be collected. Right now, they're only collecting clinical data. And you do this for the social context. What your habits are, do you spend the whole day indoors? Or do you go out in the sun and sweat it out? There have been verified reports that vitamin D will help, as well as zinc, homemade remedies, turmeric and ginger. So to do the social context, we'll need more than just clinical data. And when you have the database, each case should be assigned a unique ID. And you do this at the national level. This is because people move around and they keep it tested again. And if they do not have an ID when they test again, they could be listed as a new case. We need the historical data because that will be referred to later on when we look at the history because the virus is evolving. Taiwan has an app on its mobile phone and they use it for contact tracing. They use it also for communicating to the individual. And if you need additional data, like we already collected data for almost 1 million, but if we need more data, then we'll need to do resurveys. And so we can put that into an app on your mobile phone. Almost everybody has a smartphone. And if we develop a COVID-19 vulnerability index, we can integrate that contact tracing and resurveys into the COVID-19 database. So outcomes, reinfections, history can be easily monitored. So we'll go to the vulnerability index. Vulnerability is a function of exposure. Have you been in contact with someone who has the disease or the place where the disease is, where viral load is high? Also of sensitivity, are you asymptomatic? Would you have mild symptoms? Or would you have severe symptoms? Or is it fatal to you? Of the hazard, the virus itself, which is evolving, so it's changing. Is the hazard more dangerous now than it was before? And your adaptive capacity. Exposure sensitivity and hazards, when they increase, this increases your vulnerability. Your adaptive capacity are what you do to reduce your vulnerability. And this could be anything from supplements, exercise, exposure to the sun, or other factors that we have not even gone into yet. Now, to develop the index, just like any other hazard index that we've been doing, we can use analytic hierarchy process, or AHP, which is employed for problems involving complexity. This is a very complex problem, and AHP enables us to handle this complexity. Basically, you have factors, and those factors have ranks. Each of those factors have classes, and each class has a weight. So for any case, for any individual, for each of those factors should belong to one class. And so you take the rank of that factor and the weight of that class, multiply them over all those factors, and you get your index. So factor I has a rank, and those factors have classes, and each of those classes have weights. You take the product. Let's say this factor for blood type, or gender, or age class. When you do gender, your weight class for males will be higher than for females. So if there are only two, you cannot have zero weights. Females would be assigned the weight of 1, males would be assigned the weight of 2. If you look into blood type, and O is the least vulnerable, then your class O would have a weight of 1, and all the rest could have a weight of 2. And your factors, we already know about gender and age group. Population density could be a factor. The location of where you live could be a factor. Blood type, we discussed that, etc. And you take these factors, assign them ranks, and they have classes, and they assign them weights. Usually, AHP is employed where you have no data or very sparse data. Now, in this case, this is data rich, and this is heaven for data scientists. And instead of employing experts, what they do in AHP, they take a panel of experts, they ask them questions, what factor and the rank, the classes of those factors and their weights. And then to control the bias, they are compared pairwise. Now, however good the intentions, opinions are still subjective. So in this case, we'll let the data drive the research. We'll let the data speak for itself. So from the data itself, we'll derive which factors to use, how to rank them, what classes to use, and what weights to assign. A statistical technique called principal components analysis, or its variants if your data is categorical, to determine the factors and their ranks. What PCA does is that it takes the whole data cloud, analyzes the covariances, groups them into components. So the variables that are related to each other will appear as one component. And the first component contributes the most to the variability of the data. The next component will contribute lesser than the first. The third component will contribute lesser than the second, etc. Within those components, the variables are assigned values, and since you only need one variable in that component, you choose the one that has the most effect. Whether negative or positive, you take the highest absolute value. So if you had four components that explains about 99% of the variability in the data, then all you need are four variables. So principal component analysis is a data reduction technique. Out of all the data that you collect, it will come out with a parsimonious set that you can use. And then the ranks would be if it appears in the first component and then that's the highest rank. Next rank would be the second component. Next rank would be the variable you choose for the third component, etc. Then we use descriptive stats and histograms within those selected factors to determine the classes. And then from those classes, we assign weights given a priori information. Like if we look at age classes and we determine that the 70 to 81 age class is the most vulnerable, then that is assigned the highest class weight for that factor. And so you can build your model this way. Looking at this more critically, yes, this is the most infection. But compared to this, if these are what was who were admitted, and these were who recovered and who died. If you subtracted this from that, then you'd have very little left here. And so this ratio of recovered and mortality to admitted here will be higher than it is here. And so this 71 to 80 group would be more vulnerable than this group here. So to calibrate it, we take half the data at random, run the model, sort it according to vulnerability index, check the outcomes, and where most lie, that will be when the outcomes change, that will be where the thresholds will be assigned. So you have a certain range for, say, you're vulnerable and non-vulnerable. If the data resolution were finer, if you could determine outcomes as asymptomatic, mild, severe, and fatal, then you'd have four thresholds to look at. But you'd derive more meaning from your model. And then you use the other half to validate your model. After calibration, you compute the error of the model. That would be those who are in the wrong groups according to their outcomes, divided by the total number of respondents. Then that would be your model error in your calibration phase. Now you run the other half again in the validation phase, and then compute using the same thresholds as when you calibrated. You calculate your error again. If your error in validation stage is equal to or less than the error in the calibration stage, then you validated your model. If the error in the validation stage is bigger than the calibration stage, then you'd have to recalibrate. So when the errors match and your model is validated, more data will still be coming in because the test will continue. And as they come in, you can use those to validate the model. And when you're done validating, if it is an error, you can use those again to recalibrate your model. And so as time goes on, your model should be smarter. We're doing this to identify who are the most vulnerable because in the lockdown areas that have been locked down for 3 months or more, if they're still alive, they most probably are already resilient. And since the virus does not persist in the environment for more than a few days, this was updated by WHO, then your lockdown areas may be already sterile and the lockdowns may not be necessary anymore. So if you open those up, you can reduce your aid packages by a significant number. Now, the aid packages would be sent to those in isolation, either at home or in the quarantine facilities. There is a temptation to use the vulnerability index to determine your resilience and say that I'm resilient, I will be affected by the virus. We are discouraging this because of the uncertainty of the model. If the uncertainty of the model affects the high end, then you'll still be vulnerable. But if it is at the lower end, you may be resilient or you may be vulnerable. So it is used only to identify the most vulnerable of society so that they can be protected. Because we have to open up the economy. To do this, we may need a symbol for resilience or a resilience patch. If you tested positive to the rapid test, it means you've been exposed, you have survived, and now you have some resilience. The virus is evolving. It is now 6 to 9 times more infectious, and reinfection is possible. Initial findings show that the new variant is not more virulent than before. If your previous symptoms were mild, or if you were asymptomatic, chances are, if you were reinfected, you'd have the same or lesser outcomes than before. You'd still be mild, or you'd still be symptomatic. If that is so, then you can be issued a COVID-19 resilience patch. And what do we do with the patch? You wear it on your person. This is to identify you that you are resilient. You've been through this and you are now resilient. And how does this help you? We still practice the new normal protocols because there will still be susceptibles around. If you exhibit symptoms, resilient or not, you'd have to be denied entry to wherever it is you're going, and you'd have to quarantine voluntarily, either at home or in the facilities. We'll use the resilience patch to jumpstart the economy. People need to get back to work. This will be to enhance transportation in transportation sector, the food and other services. So let's say your jeeps. You've seen examples of socially distant jeeps where you put in plastics, and imagine how hot that would be. And if you're riding a jeep socially distanced, you'd have to pay double for your seat and the one next to you that cannot be occupied. And so if you have public transport like a jeep, you can designate them for your resilient by displaying the patch on the jeep itself. So if this is for resilient people, only those with the patch can ride, and they don't actually have to social distance anymore. So they don't have to pay twice the amount. If you are in a tricycle and you don't have the patch, no one can sit beside you, and you have to pay 4 times, sometimes 5 times the fare. If you have the patch, you can ride with others who have the patch as well, and you only pay regular fare. For your public buses, if they have two doors. You can assign one section for your susceptibles, the other for your resilience. Or front of the bus would be for social distancing. Back of the bus would be for your resilient. This is to get the people to work. It would be unfair for them to be paying double or four times the fare if they are resilient anyway. And you can do the same for public and working spaces. Designate those to the resilient and segregate them from the susceptible. So if this is implemented, we'd have a newer normal. We'd still do the face mask, social distancing, sterilizing your hands, but also display your resilient patch if you are resilient. So what are the consequences of the landscape? We'll be doing this on the pillars of civil society that we showed earlier. And we'll do it first for the government. It does not seem that the government will relent. Congress granted the president extra powers. And then Congress also shut down the largest network in the Philippines. The president recently signed into law the Anti-Terrorism Act. The government will not relent. They want to borrow, but if only fiscal remedies are provided, the economy will go into recession. Because if you're into manufacturing, you need your workers to be able to produce. How will your workers get to you if they have to pay double or four times fares? If you are in the services, then you need your client. What the Filipinos do in 86, in 97, when the economy was really bad, is that they go into the underground economy. And the new underground economy is online retailing. Although the Bureau of Internal Revenue wants to control that, I don't think they will. They can. And so that will thrive. Another way out would be investment to diversify your investment portfolios. Warren Buffett earned 40 billion from Google when it was down in March. Others are resorting to gold, which is the most stable currency. Still others are investing into tech. If you are into the market, you may want to look at AstraZeneca, which is leading the way in the race for a vaccine. Otherwise, especially professional services, the economic future looks bleak. For the environment, since man is not interfering with it, it will recover. And agriculture are one of the areas that could survive this pandemic. There will always be a demand for food. For the rest of society, we are already beginning to see signs of unrest in some sectors. In the transport industry, its former president, Maranan, died of a cardiac arrest because of frustration in their conditions. Drivers are on the streets begging for alms. And education, especially private schools, private school teachers were not qualified for aid packages. Not from DTI, not from SSS, not from Department of Education. And so a lot of schools have already closed. And even the teachers in the public schools, about 70% ready for distance and blended education. And they still need laptops, they still need devices, they need access to the internet. But more importantly, they need delivery systems and content that will match your learners such that it can reach even those who are affected by the digital divide. So in closing, the virus is evolving and this adds to the uncertainties. Vaccines may be available by the year's end, but efficacy and affordability are still to be seen because the virus itself is evolving. The methodological approach outlined here is really more important than specifics. The specifics should adapt as conditions change, but the approach uh, should be sound. As the primary source of truth, COVID-19 national database is still the most critical component of any plan to manage this pandemic, especially because the virus is evolving. Data should still be continuously collected because conditions are changing. Data resolutions should be revised to make it more useful. Otherwise, it's back into the black hole of ignorance as the formal economy goes into recession. The greatest fear is of the unknown, but the best way to overcome that fear is to question, to seek answers, and to learn. Thank you very much, and I will be glad to entertain your questions. So, can we end it now? I mean, this pandemic?
All right. Thank you, Sir Dante, for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. Okay, so yes, well, we can see how great Sir Dante is. We can see how he really knows his stuff. And as he mentioned, he's not, he's not an uber expert in one specific field, but you can see that he is able to integrate all these fields, all this information, and really that's my key takeaway from this is that as a landscape architect, we tend to be focused in our inner circle, but really we should be abiding by systems thinking. We should be thinking not just in terms of spatial, but also in policy, in terms of scientific. In fact, one thing that I like to think of when I do designs is to think of it as like design is like a teacup where T is the data, it's the policies, where teacup is the our design itself, the landscape architecture, the architectural parts. Without the teacup, we cannot drink the tea. But without tea, what's the use of the teacup? Yes. So all right. So now we're going to go into the open forum. You can still input your questions if you want to clarify some things with Sir Vergara. Speaking of which, hello, Sir Vergara.
Hi, good evening to all. Thank you for having me. It is an
All right.
honor, pleasure.
Yes. Okay. Uh, Before we proceed to the Q&A open forum, we would like to request everyone to please accomplish the feedback form on tonight's lecture by clicking the link in which we will flash on our live stream. Yes, this feedback form, tiny URL. We'll be we'll be sending certificates of participation to all those who will submit accomplished feedback forms. All right, thank you. All right, now let's answer some questions. Okay, so James. Okay, first, sir, should the use of public spaces such as parks and plazas be promoted for human health and wellness, or should they be closed to reduce spread of virus?
Okay, understand this correctly. May echo ata. Uh, you can my
Uh,
exit and segregate the people from the recipient then you can use spaces. However,
Okay.
I think this is going to improve. So, since the government want to open public places and parks, thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Okay. Next question. Okay. Sir, can you provide other examples showing how big the impact of the pandemic is to the environment?
First of all, let's qualify environment because there is the natural environment and there is the built-up environment. The natural environment will recover because human intervention or interference reduces a lot. It's the built-up environment that will be heavily impacted by the pandemic. How do we solve the
Okay. Okay. Everyone. If Okay, the feedback form link is posted in the comments, so you can just click that. All right.
Bobby may
Oh no, sir. Wait. We're having some technical difficulties. Wait.
do you have two devices on?
Sir, I think. Yeah.
Hello? Yun, wala na Thank you. I think we're good.
Okay. Good. You're good. All right. I doubt that people understood our conversation earlier, so maybe we can take it from the top.
Okay, so
All right.
it,
So first, should the use of public spaces such as parks and plazas be promoted for human health and wellness, or should they be closed to reduce the spread of virus?
if we implement my exit strategy and segregate space for both, you can actually open them up.
Okay.
Or if you still want the susceptible not to use the open spaces and plazas, the resilient can use them. If we follow the exit strategy and we hide the most vulnerable, even if the resilient get reinfected, they will either be mild or asymptomatic anyway. So
Okay.
you can open up to public spaces and the parks. For the other
Okay.
question, can you
Yes.
provide
Okay.
examples showing how big the impact of the pandemic is to the environment?
Yes, sir.
You have to qualify your environment. Your environment is not just the natural. It can be natural, it can be built up or man-made. A
Okay.
natural environment will definitely recover because there will be less interference from human activity. The built-up environment will be what will be impacted the most.
Mm-hmm.
But if you again segregate space for the resilient and the susceptible, the resilient can use your man-made environment. In the presence of the susceptible, the resilient will still have to follow the protocols of the new normal.
I see. Okay, sir. I have a question actually, sir. Because the your proposition of using resilience patches to help identify who the who the resilient people are versus those who are susceptible. Wouldn't you think that it might be that system might be susceptible to abuse as well? Like would like it might be baka may palakasan system. What do you
Only
think of that?
I don't recommend that it be controlled by any government body.
Okay.
People can make their own patches if they think they will survive this.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone was tested for the rapid test. So if you come from the long lockdown areas and you recall having the symptoms and they were mild to you or probably you were asymptomatic, and if you think you are resilient yourself, well, it is at your own risk.
Mm,
So if you think it's worth the risk, then you may go ahead and make your own patch. You can copy,
okay.
go to the printers if they're open now, and have it made yourself. Stick it onto your face mask, your cap, your shirt, your
Mm-hmm.
jacket, your bag, apron, whatever. I don't recommend it being controlled. Only when it is controlled, then that's when the abuse comes in.
Ah, so I can see that you're opting for a sort of a grassroots initiative. Is that right?
Yes, and an intelligent initiative. We were brought up on a culture of fear and ignorance. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you test positive for the rapid test, uh, people are don't want to mingle with you. They think you tested positive for the rapid test and you're still infectious. That's not always true.
Mm-hmm.
So there are no choices available to the people. I want this
I
to
see.
be intelligent. The people will take their own risk if they put on the resilient patch and they did not test. I don't think if you think you are vulnerable, either severe or fatally, that you'd put on the patch to on yourself.
Okay. Ayun, another question, sir. Since yung model po ay magiging deciding factor ng segregation of resilient and susceptible, given na walang mass testing and yung data natin is not representative of the actual spread of the virus, how can we be sure na yung model is representative ng actual na nangyayari?
We're not using the model to represent what is happening. We are using the model to identify the most vulnerable in society. We're changing the lockdowns, the quarantines from what used to be the whole island of Luzon to regions to provinces, municipalities, even granular to houses and streets. This is what Vietnam did.
Mm,
If you think you are vulnerable, stay home. If you think uh, you have the disease, stay home or go to the quarantine facility. But we were not using the model as a representative of the population. The representation of the population should be from the sampling itself. And since they only sample those who exhibit the symptoms, this is called directed sampling. It will never be
mhm.
representative of the population.
I see. Well, come to think of it, I believe I've read this before somewhere, but all models are wrong except when they are right, something like that.
All models have error.
Yes.
You
So I guess
run,
it's less about making it 100% accurate because that is a pipe dream and
always
more of how to apply it correctly in the correct context. Is that right, sir?
only only the Almighty is absolute. Everything else
Yeah.
is
All right. Uh, okay.
Advice to landscape architects:
Yes, sir. Any advice to landscape architects?
your
Uh, yes.
your
Uh,
profession will be directly affected by this.
Definitely.
Profession is demand driven. I had this in the lecture, but I had to cut it out to shorten it. Uh, Real estate, construction, development is down. So unless it's a government project, nobody's going to fund any development.
Hmm.
So this will directly affect you. Your way out is to diversify. If you have farms, now's the time to do farming.
but but yes, that's actually good advice, sir. Like I said, I think people should be more holistic in their way of thinking, and I think it's a good opportunity to open up what we study, what we dive into. So, like you mentioned, farming, maybe even read up a bit more on academic stuff like sociology and all that. All right. So here's one question. As open space planners or designers, being that COVID is considered a zoonotic disease, are there safeguards or policies or standards for future use that we can formulate and later on implement to combat or prevent, since developments and urbanizations are inching closer and closer to natural environments?
Uh, Understand that this pathogen is evolving. The 1918 Spanish flu, which was H1N1 avian flu, it ended without a virus. So people develop herd immunity over time. This will end.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a question of if; it's just a question of when and how much
Mm-hmm.
damage it will do to society and the economy. So right now, your primary goal should be uh, to safeguard yourselves and to safeguard your livelihoods. If
I
your
see.
livelihoods are directly affected, then you'll have to diversify. And there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee. Even uh, the the vaccines that are being developed right now, there is no guarantee that they will be affordable, and there is no
Mm-hmm.
guarantee that they will still be effective after the virus evolves. So if our only strategy is to hunker down and wait, we'll have to wait a long time.
I would like that. Oh, thank you. Thank you, by the way, to Dean Domingo for that last question.
So
Sir, one last thing. Would you recommend or suggest any type of green infrastructure that could help facilitate uh, this road towards achieving herd immunity? I mean, naturally, of course, without doing anything, it'll happen. But is there any way to expedite it uh, through a physical means?
through a physical means, mm, understand this is a mobile hazard, and
Okay.
the host and the vectors are both humans.
Mm-hmm.
And because it involves humans, the solutions may not only be technological, they'll also have to be social. The first of this was the new normal protocols to arrest the spread.
Mm-hmm.
Adding one, which is the resilience patch. In terms of infrastructure, the only thing I can think of are quarantine facilities. But aside from that, uh, if we do practice what I have showed you tonight,
Mm-hmm.
and we could accelerate our road to herd immunity. The most vulnerable can hunker down, wait for the vaccine, while
Mm-hmm.
can work, do work, and then get the get the economy up running again. Otherwise,
Mhm.
this will take a long time.
Right, sir. Another question, sir. Related to the past one. Will this will do you think the approaches we take to mitigate the spread of the virus in urban areas is the same in less built, more rural areas? Actually, I've read somewhere that dense cities are more protected apparently than the sprawling subdivisions, suburbs. And I'm still trying to wrap my hand around that. Could you give your thoughts on that? Why
Uh,
that is so?
that's the first time I've heard it, and uh, I should think the denser your population, the more vulnerable the inhabitants would
Hmm.
be.
That I thought that too, but they also mentioned that because uh, facilities are easier to access in dense cities, which is actually the key reason why people go into cities. That's why it's much safer apparently. Whereas it's the more difficult to attain these places, these services when you're all sprawled out and it takes an hour in car to reach any a hospital, for example.
Yeah, yes, that's true. Uh,
What do you think
this
of
is
that, sir?
a question on what's the difference between the spread in rural and urban areas. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
since it is by community transmission that is the most, how do you say, that is the fastest transmission. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
your your densities in your rural areas are a lot less, and so your
Mm-hmm.
contacts are a lot fewer as well. And that would be the main difference between how the virus spreads between the rural and the urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Going back to your question, is it still on infrastructure?
More of how mitigation measures in rural areas differ from urban areas.
Mitigation.
Yeah.
Well, mitigation, yes, you still need your quarantine facilities, access to health services in case you contract the disease. But the demand would be a lot less in the rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
We Laguna was kept under ECQ for a long time because we did not have the facilities
Ah,
until
yes.
later. That's when they downgraded us to GCQ after we got about, I think, two or three uh,
Mm-hmm.
testing labs.
I
So there's
see.
a question here from Joshua Ting.
Sorry.
If we have another ECQ for 14 days,
Yes, sir. What would it work if we have another ECQ for 14 days with those experiencing symptoms be tested and those positive isolated? Since the government says we now have an increased capacity in testing and isolation. You or in other words, will you think round two of more of an intense ECQ will work if this time, second time around, we actually do what we should have done in the first place? You think, or is it just too late?
it's never
What
too
do you
late
have to say?
to do more tests. It is
Mm-hmm.
what the biggest drawback was. We did not want to test. We'd rather give care packages. Without the
Oh,
test,
okay.
you have the data. Without the data, you don't have information. Without the information, you cannot make decisions. And so you lock down uh, the whole province. Even if you don't have to do that, I don't think it will be that effective. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be overly stressful again for those, especially where the virus load are low. So
Oh, yeah,
increase
that's true.
testing to identify where the infections are, and then lock down the houses, the streets. This is what Vietnam did, and please
Ah,
implement the database. It's not too late to do that. We have 100. We had a million cases, and
mm-hmm.
that's even less than 1%. We'll still be doing this. We only went 6, 7 months. This could last for 2, 3 years. So
I see.
relative, we start on the database.
So at the end of it, it's just about data, get more data, so that we can react accordingly or
Get
proactively
data
resolve this.
and refine the data resolution itself. Add categories to your outcomes.
Hmm.
Right now, just as they're showing in their graphs, admitted, recovered, and died. We need to know, uh, are all the admitted positive? How much of them are mild, and how much of them are asymptomatic?
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, sir. Okay. I believe this is our last question. Uh, let's see. Since most fitness and sports-related facilities are still closed, is it advisable for people to go outside and do physical activities? I've seen a few people running outside with masks on. If so, is there a recommended amount of time to stay outside that will not massively increase exposure to the virus?
This is all dependent on the virus load in your area. You still have to wear the mask because it is law. Have you ever tried running with the mask on? My son-in-law does this, and I don't know how he does it. Uh, you could exercise, go outside, run with your mask on, and as long as the virus load is low. But if it is high in your area, you'd be endangering yourself.
I see. All right. Okay. One last question, sir. May pahabol pa. Okay. Okay. So, yes. From Ma'am Cecilia Tens, how can a resilience patch be credible if this is not issued by a recognized authority on a database? What do you think of the Philippine Red Cross app and the controversial Stay Safe app?
The Philippine Red Cross Act, although it is a database, does it identify uniquely your cases? I mean, individuals, are they issued a COVID-19 uh, case number? If not, then there is no tracing back into the history of your respondent. And since you may lose your antibodies if you have already them built in you,
Mhm.
then there will be no way of tracing whether you had contracted the disease before or not. The resilience patch is put on a voluntary basis. Credible
Okay.
or not, it is the wearer's risk to put it on and go outside and expose himself.
Okay.
I'd rather not have it controlled by any government agency. You've seen how you've seen how this pandemic has been managed so far. So this is strictly on your risk assessment of yourself. If you think you've had the virus, you exhibited the symptoms, but you're up and about and you're not exhibiting them anymore, or you tested and you're not positive for the PCR test and you're not infectious, you put on the patch so that you can go to work. This is all up to you. This is on you.
Okay. So again, it's really just an initiative from the bottom up rather from top down,
Definitely,
is
yeah.
what you're proposing. Yeah, which seems to work more often recently. Anyway, eto sir, may isa pa pong pahabol. Uh, yes, from Francis June Makalam. Hello, classmate. Hi, sir. How can we translate these models to ordinary people? Is it true that we're already flattening the curve?
No, it is not true. We're flattening the curve. If you go to ncov.ph and you'd see infections are still rising. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
virus is evolving and it is about 6 to 9 times more infectious. But the early reports are it is not more virulent than before. So
Okay.
you're infected, but your symptoms were mild or you were asymptomatic, then that's the most that will do to you so far. But this is
Mhm.
changing almost every day, and we must be on our guard.
Right.
And to translate these models to an ordinary to the ordinary people, we'll have to popularize
Mm-hmm.
uh, so that they can interpret.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly, I don't think this will be adopted by the government
Well, not in the foreseeable future, maybe.
at all.
Yeah, but all right. Thank you for your insights, sir, with regards to that. Okay, so that's our last question. Thank
Uh,
you, sir Dante.
can I address the body?
Ah,
I'd
yes,
like
sir.
for having me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we were kept under a veil of fear and ignorance. And the reason I put this out is that so that we can have information to make our decisions for ourselves, which is science based.
Mm-hmm.
Only then can I think we can open up this economy again. Otherwise, it's hunker down until your savings run out, or you can find a different livelihood because professional services will definitely be hit if there are no demands for it.
All right.
Oh, further questions?
No, sir. I believe that was the last one we'll entertain for tonight. All right.
Think so.
Yes,
How
sir.
with me?
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir.
Uh, well, first let me say my school, the School of Environmental Science and Management
Ooh,
at
yes, sir.
University of the Philippines, Los Baños,
Mm-hmm.
has not heard this. You are the first audience. And so they have no endorsement on this. It can be very controversial, and the atmosphere today is not very conducive for what can be considered as dissent because of
Mm-hmm.
the designed laws.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get in touch, Bobby has my email address,
Mm-hmm.
and he can give it probably to you. I purposely left it out of the video as well as reference to your organization because I do plan to distribute it as wide as possible. I
Mm-hmm.
want people to know there are alternatives to how this pandemic is being managed, and the alternatives are based on science and information.
Okay.
So to get in touch with me, send me email. I am not on Facebook. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir, for your for your entire lecture. That it's so insightful. That's all I can say. And
For having me.
I I really think that this could help us open our minds, think beyond our respective industries, yeah, especially to my fellow landscape architects who I really believe that we should make data driven design not something special but the norm. Do you agree, sir?
Well, thank you very much
Anyway,
for having me.
yes, sir. Okay. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Once again, thank you, sir, so very much. Thank you very much, sir, Prof. Vergara, for being with us tonight. Right. We also like to thank our audience for attending our very first lecture of this three-part series. Yes, a three-part series. Our next two lectures will be tomorrow and on Thursday. Yes, it's on Thursday. Today is Tuesday. Uh, Pre-registration is actually still open. So if you want to listen to our next two lectures, we highly encourage you to pre-register. To pre-register. Yes, our speakers for tomorrow will be Dr. Philip Ian Padilla from the University of the Philippines, Visayas, and he will share insights on our topic from the field of public health. For Thursday, we will be joined by Dr. Michael Tan of the UP Diliman College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. Yes, that's Dr. Michael Tan, who will deliver a lecture on our topic from the perspective of anthropology and cultural studies. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Sir Vergara, again for being here. And a pleasant evening to you all. Goodbye.